Um,
Okay.
well, I would like to hear about your life and how your beautiful style of yoga developed, really, because I find it so kind and forgiving, particularly in the places that I find difficult to forgive, you know, the sticky bits and the bits that are cross and upset. And somehow I think because of how you are in your body, that transmits the permissiveness for your students to let go.
Yeah, well, it has sort of evolved over the years. Um, as you know, both Victor and I moved away from the Iyengar practice, which we were both involved with in the beginning. I worked myself fully in it, but I never felt happy in it.
What was that like, learning from Iyengar? So it sounds like it must have been a mismatch for you. Or what was your practice like on the inside at the time?
So long ago, I think I read about yoga somewhere in my late teens or early 20s. I think it was a book by Huxley. And I read one sentence. I mean, it fascinated me. But I read one sentence which said, the teacher appears when the student is ready. So I thought, okay, you know, because there was no yoga in England, and the only thing people would think of was some kind of fakir sticking knives into himself or sitting on a bed of nails. This was the concept of yoga, or somebody staring at their navel. That was what, the main public put out, or anybody I talked to. So I couldn't find any teacher anywhere. So I just got on with my life. I was teaching in schools and colleges and things, basically physical education, but my passion was creative movement. And so when I heard from a friend one day, I belonged to kind of an esoteric society, and this guy came up to me and said, I found a yoga teacher. Do you want to meet her? I said, yes, when? He said, now. And I've never done anything like that before. I said, okay. And we went straight off to somewhere outside London. And I watched, it was a summer's evening with a park outside. I remember the atmosphere. And I just watched these postures, these bodies moving. She was actually a lovely lady who taught. Her name was Diana Clifton. And I was sold, so I joined her classes. And we were a small group, probably about 6 or 7. And we met in somebody's basement once a week, I think it was. She had, Yehudi Menuhin, the famous violinist, had been invited by Iyengar when he was in India, when Yehudi was performing in India. He had some physical problem, and he was sent by his friends to Iyengar, and Iyengar fixed him. And so then he was so impressed, he invited Iyengar to come to UK and give him private sessions here in the summer. So Iyengar was starting to come to London, or somewhere near London, every July. And the secretary of Yehudi Menuhin thought, well, why don't we start a little separate group so other people can have a chance, and also Iyengar can make some extra money to help his income, which he did. And Diana was one of the first students. I think it was just a small group. And she started teaching quite soon. So that was how I came to it. And everything else, all the other things that I loved doing, I talked all day and then I did other things in the evening. And I thought, what happens if the problem of the yoga? Although I recognized the poses when I saw them in the class, I thought, that's familiar. I know that somewhere inside me. But when I started to do them with Diana, oh God, it was painful. I was so stiff. And I didn't realize at the time that my body was pretty much out of balance and deformed from surgery I'd had in my early teens.
Okay.
They basically cut me in half twice at my neck and through my middle to go into the spine and take out 5 ganglions from there and from there and from there and from there. So that was about 1/3 of my sympathetic nervous system.
Mm.
And everything seized up around those places. And so it was more difficult, I think, for me than it should have been to do poses. But I was not going to be beaten, I was kind of a warrior. So I battled away with this yoga for 10 years. I went to India.
You studied Pune with Iyengar.
I thought it was wildly exciting. I was at that time of life. It was oriental and different and wonderful. And I loved something physical. And for the first time, I realized, or I got the impression from Iyengar that it's okay to use your body. Because I came from a background where the body was something you didn't deal with. It was not right to think about your body. And you hid all the curves and the bits that bulged out and everything. And you felt ashamed about them. Well, that's the message I got from my mother. So suddenly to be not only allowed to use my body and feel my body, but to honor it in a way that it had some kind of spiritual context. Because for me, it had always been the body is my way of expressing and my way of experiencing the divine in life, and still is. So that was exciting, but gradually I began to realize that way, and the other thing that Iyengar said that I never forgot, it is, what did he say, either unethical or dishonest to teach if you don't practice.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Which I think is a very wise thing. And it is also unethical to practice if you're not teaching. And that was a surprise.
That's an interesting statement.
It was like the doors opened, that I was allowed to spend time with my body, and that was the way that I could bring something to other people. So I'm grateful to him, for that made this huge shift. But my body, I think, partly because of the deformations that I didn't really acknowledge, I just bashed on trying to do what was expected. Became more. I became more disturbed by it, and eventually, I felt schizophrenic because I was doing those practices and really pushing and often injuring my body in order to get into the pose that was expected when my body was crying out. And so I wasn't listening really to what my body needed in order to perform the way the teacher expected.
So I think that's a very interesting point, that anybody who practices any kind of movement for an amount of time comes, you know, we find the teacher when we're ready, as you say, and then over time our inner teacher starts to emerge, and then you have a really difficult conflict, because you've given your trust to the teacher, and then our inner teacher starts to speak loudly. How was that for you?
Well, I just knew that I had to leave.
Okay.
It took a little while because I didn't want a voice inside me to say, ha ha ha, it was too hard for you.
Mm.
Because I wanted to really understand why I was leaving. And yes, one day in Pune, when we were practicing, I just looked around and saw people. Some of them had done yoga for a lot longer than me. And I realized I not only felt no light or inspiration from them, but that they had gained, but I didn't feel I even wanted to have much contact with them.
Yeah.
There was no attraction, and I thought, well, what is this? And I knew I really then had to make that shift.
Mm.
And it took a long time, because although I moved away, it was so much a part of me that it was a slow process. But I noticed as I started to listen more to my body and follow its needs and the feeling of the movement, that an old habit would come in of doing the pose or making myself perform. And it began to become very clear when I was in my own flow and when I was going back to that way of working. And so it was like peeling away all those times when I was imposing some kind of external pressure on me.
Yeah, because in the kind of the journey to release our conditioning, say, from our culture and from our families, you know, we find movement, and then we go and find a method of movement that then imposes something else on us. And we end up with a whole other kind of set of rigidity in our system.
This is the danger, I think, and it's the danger of being a teacher, because people either get inspired or feel they should do what you're doing. And so how to offer something that people can recognize and try and feel and empower themselves to continue with that and trust themselves rather than, well, that's why both Victor and I never made a method. And we never wanted to do certifications and training courses, because if you do a training course, of course it makes you money, but you're putting people yet again in line to perform something the way you tell them how to perform it. And so the teaching is much more subtle, but much more, for me, much more creative and fun to, as it were, offer things and encourage people to explore them themselves.
Yeah.
The process has been more and more to go inside and find my own places that have got stuck or have been forgotten, and they show up as pain.
Okay.
In the first moment, but then to look at that pain and see that actually it's not a dangerous thing, it's a sensation. And the sensation in the beginning is very intense. But if it's possible to stay with that sensation, instead of in former times, gritting one's teeth to go through the pain in order to achieve the expected position, or backing off and not doing it, to stay with what is bearable without contracting.
You use metaphor very well. You use the story of Inanna
Yeah.
where I can't remember the names of the characters, but one of the characters brings little gifts. Do you remember, to the broken queen?
What, sorry?
The One of the characters brings little morsels of delicious food and says, "It's okay, it's okay," and you use that as a metaphor to stay with the pain, you know,
Yeah.
and to reassure that it will be all right, and have another delicious morsel.
Yes, indeed. You have another lovely part of yourself which is waiting and going to emerge. And what's been fascinated me was how, when you do this with a part of you that is always held in, so if you put a demand on it, like to do an asana, it tightens up because it's too frightening and too painful for that part to go into that expectation. So all the other parts overstretch, and that part stays tight. And so when you meet that part, it has a lot of fear. It's holding into fear and pain. So, but it's a very important part of us that got lost somewhere along the line in our lives, either through trauma or accident or surgery or whatever. And as that part feels safe because you're meeting it in a whole different way and you're accepting it, and it begins to slowly unravel, needs a lot of focus and breath and presence. But as it releases, afterwards you feel different. And also you can find how it's connected with a part of you in your life, either in relationships or in whatever it is you do, that has been frozen up, can begin to become open and a part of you. So your life starts to open up in a beautiful way.
There's an emotional component too, from allowing these small frightened places to emerge as well, and that can be quite overwhelming for some people, particularly if you're not grounded.
Well, it is always, you never know, and in the beginning, it can release a huge amount of emotion. If somebody has had a huge trauma, for example, with the refugees here, I had a refugee young woman who I brought into the classes, and she loved them. And she did everything, but I could feel that a lot of her presenting of herself was on the surface. What she was, she really was the one that held her whole family together, that she'd also brought. And one day in a woman's course, something broke through that, and it brought out the most terrifying screams and yells. And the rest of the students kind of backed away. It felt like somebody was being murdered, but I knew that this was her moment, and it was important that she felt safe to do this. I don't think she could even control it. So all her trauma for the whole terrifying journey of leaving Afghanistan, Iran, and all the journey and all that horrors that they go through, it all suddenly poured out. And so I stayed with her and then called the other women and just invited them to all put their hands on her. So then she could really go into it. And the body moves, as you know, probably, the body shakes and moves with the release of trauma. And the sounds are all part of it. And it's so important that it comes out, that you don't stop it or try to make them feel okay. Too much lovey-dovey stuff is no good. So I just tell them, this is great, just continue. And sometimes I just touch them when they're in all this upheaval, shouting or crying or shaking. I tap them, I say their name, and I said, how are you doing in there? And they open their eyes and they look up and they say, fine. And then they go back in and more of this releasing comes out. So I know it's a healthy thing. That doesn't happen often, but I mean, it's a gift when it does. And afterwards, of course, one is totally exhausted and needs to rest. But the next day, it's as if they've been washed clean. And they come to the class with a whole different aura around them. And from then on, they are moving in a different way because they don't have that overcast tension of holding back the dark side inside them. So it goes from that kind of range just to very simple things. Like if you find a place in your body, and it can be so simple, and actually my practice has gone so far away from all that asana stuff. I mean, I sometimes bring asanas in, but the actual real intense practice is about meeting one place, whether it's somewhere in the leg where it leaves the pelvis or the hip, or somewhere where the arm opens out, and seeing what is needed. And then often little images come up, or the concept of separating. And then I found if I bring into it something in my life at the same time, it enhances the whole outcome of that process. So for example, I mean, just the concept of separating, you can't, if you separate violently, it's never good. But if you separate slowly and you'll stay with the whole process, and that does mean sometimes very intense feeling, experience, and also focus, because the mind wants to run away somewhere else. You stay with it. And then you think in your life, what do you need to separate from? A particular aspect of a relationship, or it might be something that you're over concerned about, some person you feel responsible for, and it's got to be very stuck, and you have to really separate and leave the space. Get a space inside your body, but a space in your life between you and that person, or you and that issue.
I find it really helpful in my practice to work clearly with intention. Not just to lift my arm up to stretch, but to lift my arm up to reach for something good, or to create more space for something good, or to harness imagery and mind and real concrete life events makes it much more fun. Much more fun and helpful.
It makes it much more alive.
Yeah.
You get drawn, you go back to your practice with this feeling of excitement. You know, you go, and you know it's going to be hard and difficult in the beginning, but then you get accustomed, you're just going to stay with that difficult place and watch it slowly unraveling. And another aspect is of course, the thing about space is so important, finding space, more space in the body, because fear and trauma makes us contract and close up. And then we can't fully be who we are.
You know, I'd love to hear your stories about fear and aging, because one of the things that I love about you and that you exemplify so beautifully is grace in aging. And I look around women of your age, and there is a lot of fear and a lot of self-disgust, and you don't have that, or at least you don't show that.
Yes, well, that's very nice you say that. For sure, these things come, and sometimes they hover around a little bit, but I recognize them now more. And you know, it's very easy to build on fear of what's going to happen and all the things that are put out now through the media. And you can spend your whole time on those things, but they don't really help us very much. So what I try to do is see where they get stuck in me, and then how I can release them, so that any problem that comes up in my practice, the feeling that it brings, which might be fear or might be irritation, these things come all the time because of life. I try to let them go. And when I was working with fear, everything I did in my practice, where I was looking for how to allow two places to separate and open up, created a space. And the space is like a door opening or a hole in your body. And then I would think of the fear, and I realized I had collected quite a lot of fear about the virus and all that stuff. And I knew that a lot of people had this fear. You know, my people I know quite well, it's sort of bottling themselves up in their apartment, covering themselves with masks and things. And so I just thought, well, let's see if we can let fear flow out through that space I had just created. And I suddenly got the experience of a sort of thick, heavy river, somewhat brownish, greenish, and it literally was flowing and flowing. And so that was kind of fun. But I did that in different parts of my body. But every time I worked into something and something opened, I thought, oh, I've opened another trap door here. I'm going to let the river of fear flow out of there. And the feeling of lightness that came about from that was so amazing. So that's why I tried to share it in the class. And one woman in particular wrote me that I know she was absolutely terrified, and she found it so helpful. She was slowly, didn't all happen at once, but she's slowly been able to let the fear and anxiety flow out with the process of opening up spaces in her body. And I think that is, I've always wanted to feel things through my body, and more I come down to that. Where do I feel it? And what is it doing to me? And what can I do about that? Because then when we can find ways to let the negative or the disturbing stuff out, you have a space that needs to be filled, actually. It's no good just making a space. And you can do two things. You can fill it with your own pranic energy and therefore have more power. So instead of fear flowing through you, you can have your beautiful energy flowing through, because this lovely earth energy that comes up. But you can shift into the aspect of receiving. And when you do that, the body immediately softens. And then, like I did yesterday in the Zoom class, with the, you can start to receive through the soles of the feet. You can receive the energy of the earth. And it takes a time for people to get there. And I know myself, especially, being English.
Can I clarify? Do you mean it takes a while for people to perceive it, to feel it, or takes a while for people to receive it?
It's a shift because our whole education and the expectations that are put on us are about being there for the outside world. And therefore, if you have kind of, I mean, in my time, being English and sort of Christian upbringing, you're meant to be helping people and giving to the poor and doing all this stuff. And I couldn't receive. If somebody gave me something, I would say, no, 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 that's too kind of you. You shouldn't do that. You know, I wanted to push it back on them. It was very hard for me to really receive. And if somebody was really overwhelmingly loving to me, I would just crack up because I didn't know how to deal with it. But by finding in my body that actually I just have to soften, and I give that example to students about going out into the sun. You feel the warmth of the sun and you just open up and you receive it. Sun salutation is ridiculous because, I mean, the sun doesn't care if you salute it or not. But but you begin a relationship with the sun when you receive it, as you do with people. And when you open yourself to receive from somebody, it changes everything. And I found with this whole thing of hugging, for example, that people say, can I have a hug? And they kind of clasp you. And I used to, I still have to work on myself in this, but I used to unknowingly put up some kind of boundary. And my boundary would meet their boundary. But I found that just if somebody wants a hug, if I just receive them, it's all related to releasing into the back body.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, finding it in your own body, your back body receives your front. Mm-hmm. And you can lie back in your back body. It's like a hammock. Mm-hmm. But it's very interesting if you meet somebody who hugs you and they present a sort of concrete wall.
Yeah, sometimes people grab hold of you and it's like being imprisoned.
I know.
in case they are entangled with you.
Yes, but you know, those people have spent a huge amount of their lives building up this external force and concrete body.
I wonder if you could write a letter to your teenage self, what advice would you give to her, to young Angela? If you could send a letter back in time.
Oh, definitely. Just following what you love. And because I knew all this stuff really somewhere inside, but the external expectations were so great. And it just in my teenage times and the expectations and the society I lived in, I could not really relate to it. I tried because there was nothing else. But I realize now that for me it just felt fake. And I was desperately searching for something that felt real. And not realizing it was so simple that it was me. I just had to feel me. I think my body was so messed up with these surgeries that it also made it very difficult And it took me years and years to even kind of meet them. I never went near them in my memory or in, except from the outside, and to slowly accept them and be with them and acknowledge them. And I have to work with them every day. I mean, it's definitely kept me at the practice. But I do find life is a whole lot more fun now.
Yeah, you do seem to have a lot of fun.
What?
You do seem to have a lot of fun.
Yeah, I've got a fun guy here too when I do the Zoom, so that helps.
Oh. Hi, Burns.
Hello, how are you?
I'm having a lot of fun, actually, as it goes.
Well, you know, life is short. I think that's another thing you realize as you get older. We have such a short time here, and why fill your life so hard? You know, the feeling I get, because I do love to help people, and I'm very concerned, for example, about the refugees. And we had this amazing time when they were all landing on our beaches. Every day I was down there, and sometimes, you know, really helping people off the boats, and people would hand me their babies, and I had to climb over slippery stones hoping I wouldn't drop them, finding clothes, finding food for them. It was a tremendous gift because it was literally one was on the front line, and these people from other cultures were arriving on our shore, and they had such a pride, these people, and they had such a different way of connecting. They never said thank you. They just touched their heart. And that meant so much more, that gesture, than the thank you. And they had been through such horrors, you know, but somehow they had something of themselves that was different from what we know in our culture. But then they're not allowed to come in here anymore. They're all diverted, either sent back to Turkey or diverted. And so I tried to help. I decided you can't save the world, you know, it's a tidal wave of refugees, but maybe you can help one or two people. So that's what I tried to do, partly finding friends in America who would like to support one family, and I help a little bit here and there. But what I think I've learned is not to overextend, but to watch myself more. And as you know, as I get older, I have less energy, and to allow myself to just enjoy what I have and who I am. And in a funny way, this COVID business has been a gift, because instead of having yet another group and then another group, and then getting on a plane to travel to America and do workshop after workshop, just have the time to be here and see the beautiful trees and the mountains and the storms, and just settle into experiencing what I have. So I think that's probably been my biggest gift right now.
And just a final question: if you were to talk to somebody who had never been to a yoga class before, and these people do exist, what advice would you give them if they were totally new to the experience? What could you say to give them the best experience?
Giving advice, but I always like to start asking people to make themselves comfortable. And that is huge, because people come to a class thinking they're going to learn something, and they're all ready to be out there. And if they have to start feeling comfortable in themselves, it really is the beginning. And you feel comfortable on the floor. So then you can take them inside immediately and notice what they feel in their legs. And the possibility that letting the leg know it's supported on the ground. something releases. And I've seen sometimes knees that were up here just sinking down like that. When we let our awareness, which is, we think of that as what's in our brain, when we let the brain rain downwards inside, and all this can rest, and you're inside your body, and you start to feel, you know, you go down, the rain goes down into the earth. So we go down into the earth of our body and beyond into the actual earth. And that's where we start, I think. And it's enough, that's enough. You know, you can put your legs out like that, and then you can spend a long time just feeling, where does my leg understand that the earth supports it? And all of a sudden something says, oh, really? Inside. So it's important. This thing up here is important, but if you look at your leg, you say, why doesn't my leg release more? And so you push it and pull it. But if you just go down inside and let that leg know that it's quite safe, the earth is supporting it, suddenly something magical happens. And I love that magic. It's something we can't explain, or scientists will try to explain, I'm sure. But to be left with the mystery and the magic of this body experience. And I think the only way to be spiritual and the divine and the huge expanse of whatever the afterlife is, or the life of space, or angels and all that, the only way to that light, pure light, and beauty is through the body. And you go down until you know yourself inside the body, and then you can let go. You can only let go of the body when you live inside it. Each thing. I mean, you can only give away something in your house when it's been yours. And so you let go of your body at that point. And then your soul can soar, and then you can experience what is way beyond the body. But all this blah, 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 and religious stuff and endless preachings, it keeps you up here in your head.
Thank you so much, Angela.
Everybody wants to do yoga, so they use all this. I stopped using Sanskrit names long ago because I think it makes it special. You know, why? It belongs to another culture, that language. Lovely if you want to learn it and you like the names, they're fun. But we're dealing with what we know, legs and arms and body. So let's bring the language back just to what we use every day. And then, I forgot what I was going to say, but I think that's where we start, just coming forward.
I think that we've come to a beautiful conclusion. Thank you so much for your wisdom and your sharing your life experience and your time. I'm so touched that you said yes. It's a real treat. Thank you so much.
Okay. And all the best. Yes. And you have a group you teach?
I do. I work with Yoga Nidra and the seasons. So I live out in the countryside outside London, and I go out and I look at the fields and the cows and the oak trees and the roses, and I bring that into the body, into the nidras every month.
Beautiful.
And bring the energy of the season, and people can use that for the menstrual cycle or for their creativity or whatever the hell they like. But it's you know, I get to go and play with butterflies.
Share their nature.
Yeah.
Wish you all the best with that.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Andrea, and thank you, Angela, and thank you, Bernd, as well for your. I'm looking around my computer to see around. Ah, there you are. I was looking like this to see where you were.
You were on the right track anyway.
Thank you so much for facilitating this. It's really kind of you.
Thank you. Have a good night. Enjoy the rest of your, well, it's still afternoon, right?
Yeah, it's 5 o'clock. Enjoy your day.
Thank you.
Go gently. Have lots of fun.
Bye.
Bye.